Hi, and welcome to EDU510. My name is Janice Wallace, and I'm going to be your professor for this course. And it's going to be my pleasure to get to know each one of you over the next few weeks and to act as a guide as you work your way through the course materials and as you come to understand yourself as a researcher and what that entails. So I look forward to that very much. I've taught this course over the last few years, and it's always, for me as the teacher, a very rich experience of getting to know you, getting to know the kinds of interests that you have, and then supporting you in the process of working towards your research project. I come from an education background. I taught in Ontario for several years, and when I returned after being married and having children and having moved to the States and then coming back to Ontario, I was looking for a teaching job, and there weren't any at the time, and so I was prompted by a friend whose husband was involved at the Department of Indian Affairs to think about maybe teaching in a First Nations community nearby. And so I pursued that and was hired at Chippewas of the Thames and taught there for a few years, where I was a teacher and then acting principal. During that time, that was a time of great learning for me, a better understanding, I think, of how what I became interested in my doctoral work and my continuing research work is how power works in organizations, because what I was seeing was very different than what I had experienced in provincial schools. So I wanted to understand that experience. I became really interested in that whole question. So I had an opportunity to pursue graduate studies, and I began with my master's at the University of Western Ontario, where I was both teaching and I was learning. So it was an ideal experience. And my master's thesis was around the whole issue of how we come to understand one another across these cultural differences, especially in organizational settings, and how that gets played out in organizational settings. So that's really what interested me from the very beginning of my graduate work. And I had an opportunity then through scholarships and so on to pursue doctoral studies. And so I decided to go to OISE at the University of Toronto, where I continued actually to teach at Western, because of course I was only a couple of hours away from Toronto. So I would go down for 2 or 3 days for my classes, had a little bed sit that I stayed in while I was there. And then I go back to Ontario, or back to London, and I'd teach my classes. So it was really interesting, because I had 2 university families really to draw from. And that became a really very rich intellectual experience for me. When I finished my doctorate, I found myself applying for professorial positions, as you do. And so I was hired at Western, and I was there for several years and decided that I'd done all of my work in Ontario. I thought it would be interesting to move to a different part of Canada and see different institutions and so on. And so I found myself, I applied and was hired at the University of Alberta. And for several years, I was a professor in the Department of Educational Policy Studies, within the specialization of educational administration. But I had cross interests, of course, in Indigenous education, in politics of education, and so on. So, and particularly around issues of social justice, because those were central, really, to the kinds of questions that I was asking. So it was an ideal department for me. And then I was asked to take on a role as an associate dean with particular responsibilities in undergraduate student services, working with programmatic change. And so we went through 3 years actually of working on developing programmatic changes, but I also, of course, was involved with the students who were at the core of undergraduate student services, and getting to know some of the schools in the area and the teachers and principals in the area as well. So I had a really wonderful experience. And then I retired, and I'm now living in Victoria, in British Columbia. But I do miss that interaction. And so teaching these courses has been a great experience, and kind of continuing that kind of interest. And I found it a really, really worthwhile one. As I mentioned, my research interests center around issues of how power works in educational organizations in particular, although we could apply it across various organizations. My questions are around who benefits most, who benefits least, and why is that? What is there about the particular organizational structures, ethos, etc., that makes that a continuing issue in organizations, and particularly around issues of indigeneity and issues of gender. Those are the two areas that I've spent most of my time looking at. So you could say that my primary interest then are around issues of social justice, around issues of diversity, and particularly around issues of gender. And you'll become familiar with that as we move through the course, because of some videos that have been produced. With this course, part of my responsibility is going to be, well, my primary responsibility is going to be supporting you in the process that you're engaged in. And I do that in several ways. First of all, in just the organization of the course, and as a group, those of us who teach this course, we work on developing the course outline, what goes into the eClass page, etc. This year, we've added several videos, including ones that we've produced ourselves, around research interests that may or may not be covered in the various things that we're able to cover in the time that we have for this course, so that you have a much broader repertoire for which you can choose the approaches that you take in your own research. We also we approach the whole issue of research more theoretically in this course, but we also approach it very practically. So the assignments are meant to mimic or mirror the kinds of activities that you'll be engaged in when you're doing your own research. So this gives you an opportunity to do several things. One of them is to actually engage in those activities. Secondly is to think about them critically, to write about them and to hone your writing skills. So that will be a part of what we'll be looking at, and to continue to develop your skills around citations and learning APA and that sort of thing. Some of you will be very proficient. Some of you, this may be fairly new to you, depending on the discipline that you've been involved in your undergraduate and so on. So we'll be working on that and working with you. As you are aware, I'm some distance away from you, but fortunately anymore electronically, we're very, very close to one another. So anytime that there's an issue, you can certainly get in touch with me by email. I'm happy to get in touch with you by Skype or Google Plus or whatever. Phone call if that's more convenient, and we can make connections those ways. So I always say to students, it's always better if you have questions or concerns or something's come up. Life happens during these courses, and you need some advice, or you're wondering or worried about something. It's always better to talk to me earlier rather than later, and I can assure you that we can always find some way of approaching an issue that's going to be helpful to all of you, but also maintain the integrity of the course and the learning experience for you and others. So I hope that tells you a little bit about myself. On the eClass site, and you can go to the video that goes through the eClass site, and I think it'll be on eClass page below this one. You'll be able to see various aspects of the course. You'll also be able to see that I've told you 10 things about me, and I'm hoping that you'll tell me and others in the class 10 things about you, so that we get acquainted with one another a little better. I know some of you already know each other because of the classes that you've been engaged in, but I don't know many of you. So it gives me an opportunity to get to know you better as well. Anyway, I will stop there, and I hope that this will be helpful to you, at least to be introduced to me, so that you have a face to the name and to the person that's going to be marking your papers and that sort of thing, that we can have a more comfortable relationship, and that we'll have a great time together in this course. So welcome and all the best as you pursue EDU510.